Now that we've spent some time in Unity animating our character and coding his movement, we'll now be heading back into our 2D drawing application, in my case Photoshop, and create his weapon and projectile graphic. Now this weapon will be coded in such a way that its topmost tip always looks at the mouse cursor. It will basically be rotating left and right depending on the cursor's position, which will enable the player to aim and kill enemies. So like I did with the player character, I'm sketching various weapon designs, trying to come up with something that fits nicely with the player. Now, since we're making an action top-down shooter game, and that a lot of the appeal and fun is based on shooting projectiles, we should make the weapon impressive. I'm going to get mine almost as long as the player, to demonstrate its importance and place in the game. Later in the course, we'll be making even more weapons, more powerful than this one, but still, I'll make this one look impressive, and then make the others even more so. Since this weapon is supposed to shoot fireballs, I'll also try and add something related to heat, fire, or lava, to make everything feel more cohesive and believable. So yeah, the number one takeaway here is to really highlight what's important in your game. If shooting is important, then make big weapons and projectiles. If jumping is a key part of your game, as it is in a platformer for example, then make sure that jump feels awesome and interesting. Always keep in mind what the player will be doing a lot of in your game, and make sure that that particular aspect looks and feels epic, or the player will obviously lose interest and quit playing. Okay, now that I've come up with a design I think will look cool for the player's first weapon, I'll lower its opacity, make a new layer, and begin painting over it with the same brush I used to paint my player character. I'll begin by blocking out the main colors, keeping in mind that if I want to then animate this weapon, I need to paint each part I wish to move independently on a separate layer. In this case, I would like the spiky fire atop the wooden handle to shake and flicker, so I'll make sure to paint that fire on a new layer called fire, for example. I'll then grab a soft round brush and give my fire a slight warm glow. Once you're done, you can separate the different sprites that make up your weapon, turn off the background layer so that the background is transparent, and then export this file as a PNG inside of your Unity project. Now you'll have to go through the exact same steps as were taken previously, changing the sprite mode from single to multiple, hitting apply, and then in the sprite editor slicing your weapon's top part and handle. I'll also change the pivot point for both sprites. I would like that the handle rotates, moves and scales from its bottom tip. Same for the fire. Now I can drag and drop those two parts in the scene view, rename them nicely and parent my fire to the handle. This way when I move, rotate or scale the handle, the fire will do the same thing. Now as I said before, I want to animate this weapon, so I'll head over to my animation window and hit create new animation. Here I'll be prompted to save my animation somewhere in my project. I'll head over to my animations folder and create a new folder next to the player one called weapons. This is where I'll save all animations related to my various weapons. I'll call this animation idle, and then in my animation timeline I'll hit the record button to begin animating. And this animation is going to be very simple. I simply want the fire sprite scaling up and down very fast, as if it's flickering with life. So I'll select the fire and at 5 milliseconds, I'll scale it down slightly. And then I'll copy the first keyframes and paste those at 10 milliseconds. This way the animation loops. And that's really all I'll do for this simple weapon animation. I can now parent this actual weapon to my player character, this way when he moves, the weapon will move with him. Super. So hopefully importing sprites, animating them, and this whole concept of parenting game objects to other game objects is beginning to make more sense. With that all done, I'll head back into Photoshop to make some more art. This time I'll get to work on the projectile. So like with the weapon, I want to make this projectile large and exciting. So I'll sketch out a fireball and then use the same painting techniques I used for the weapon and player to bring it to life. So as you can see, my top technique to make stuff glow is really just to use a basic soft round brush and use that to paint a soft halo around the design. There is however another cool way you can go about making stuff glow in Unity. So I'll import this sprite into Unity and leave the sprite mode to single, this time because all I have is a single projectile sprite. Now I'll drag and drop that projectile inside of the scene view and hit the add component button and add a halo effect to this game object. And you'll see that a cool glowing effect now surrounds my projectile. I can of course change the radius of the effect as well as its color. So yeah, that's another way you can make your object glow in Unity. But I usually just paint that directly inside of Photoshop, because I have a lot more control over the shape the glow takes, as well as its opacity. Okay, I'll now add a little drop shadow to my character. It's just a little something to make him feel more part of the world, and less as if he's simply floating in midair. So once again, I'll jump into Photoshop, create a new file, and then with my soft round brush, I'll create a very simple circular shadow that I'll be placing by the player's feet. I'll import that into Unity, drag it in the scene view, and make sure that the drop shadow has a lower ordering layer than the legs, so that it renders behind those. And I'll also parent the shadow to my player so that it follows him around the scene. And there we go! Things look that much better. Now of course, if your shadow feels too dark, don't hesitate to lower its opacity inside of the sprite renderer component. And we'll of course be able to use this same drop shadow for my other objects like enemy characters, trees, and so on. As I'm at it, I think it would be nice to add a more visually pleasing background sprite to this scene, something with a bit more texture than this bland grey ground. What I'll do is simply fill a new Photoshop file, background layer, with some dark grey, and then grab a brush with slightly transparent tips, set its color to something even darker than the grey we already established, and then I'll use it to paint around my canvas. I can then grab something a bit lighter and begin blending the almost completely black with the dark grey. And I'll repeat that process until I have a more textured, interesting ground. I'll then export as a PNG inside of Unity and drag and drop that into my scene view. I'll of course make sure to set its order and layer to something like -100 so that it renders behind everything else in game, and I can now scale it around so it covers my whole scene. And you'll see how much better our scene already looks with that in place. It's this sort of quick and easy to make detail that you should try and add as soon as possible to your game. The game world will just look nicer, and as a result, you'll feel more motivated to pursue your project.